Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Tuesday once again. Um, how's everyone doing? All right. We're those of us in school, we're about a quarter of the way through the school year. I know we just finished our first marking period. Seems hard to believe, but I guess things keep moving forward, so that is something. Um, all right. Well, tonight's going to be a relatively short class because basically what I would like to do tonight is just go over essentially these production mini projects that have obviously been a part of the course from the beginning, from the syllabus, and we finally reached that point. And so basically, I just want to kind of go through the scope of the project, talk a little bit about how the next few weeks are going to work, and answer any questions that come up along the way, as we sort of head into the second half of this. So the main focus of these next 3 weeks is on the production piece of the instructional design. However, that whole production comes with a big asterisk because for those of you who are in the EdTech program, which is most of you, basically the rest of the program is about production. So what I'm trying to do with these mini projects is walk a bit of a fine line between giving a bit of an introduction to some of the concepts that are going to come up with each of these different types of instructional materials, without getting too bogged down into all of the details, which are really what a lot of the remaining coursework of the program is about. So it's called production, but in the context of this course, it's really going to be more about evaluation and selection. You don't necessarily, or I should say, you're not expected to be actually producing these materials yourself from scratch, which is not to say that you can't or that you can't use materials that you have created in the past. But that's kind of not the focus of what these 3 production weeks are going to be about. So that's just by way of kind of setting the stage of how I'm using the word production, is that it's more at this point about selection of materials, and analyzing existing materials than it is necessarily about creating new materials from scratch. So with that said, as I always like to do, open up the floor right off the bat if there are any questions or concerns that are hanging out there. I know, at this point, most of you have your phase 2 documents in. I'm hoping to have all of those returned with comments by a week from tonight. I'm going to try to chip away at them a few each day over the course of the next week. So just be looking for that feedback to come related to those phase 2s. But if there are any questions related to phase 2, related to the assessment work from last week, anything at all, I'm certainly willing to open up the floor to anybody that might have any questions at this point that I can answer for the good of the order. All right. I'm trying to use good wait time. It's hard just listening to dead silence. But so, all right. Well, again, as always, I certainly feel like a broken record about this by now, but any questions, concerns, things that come up, don't hesitate to reach out and ask. So we'll kind of jump right into some things. So let me first of all just talk about broadly the next sort of chunk of the course. Originally on the syllabus, we had 4 mini projects scheduled over the course of basically 4 weeks. However, several weeks ago, I inserted that kind of holding pattern week into things, in the interests of giving some people some more time to wrap up phase one and some other things that were on the table at that time. So I've been looking for sort of what is going to be the best way to make that week back up without adding an additional crunch onto the end of the course. So what I'm going to do is basically scale back by a week these mini projects. So instead of 4 of them, there will be 3 in total. So one over the course of the next 3 weeks. So just that'll be sort of an adjustment, and then by the end of that, we're going to kind of be back on track with the syllabus for the remaining few weeks of the course. So that's going to be one aspect of it. The next 3 weeks are kind of going to be carbon copies of each other. The mini projects are going to be the same idea each week, but we are going to be combining different combinations of learning types and materials types and scenarios in the production of the mini projects. So I'm meeting here in person this week. I'll go over all the details of these mini projects. I will be here next week, but there's not going to be a whole lot new. I may talk just a little bit about the specifics of week 2 of this, but all of the details in terms of what the mini project looks like and what you have to do and how you have to submit it and all that, I won't have to go over that a second time. So next week is going to be more by way of just a quick check-in in case anybody has any questions. The third week, so 3 weeks out from now, which would make it week 12 of the course, there will not be an online meeting that week. And that's partly, again, because by that point, you'll sort of know what these mini projects are about. That also happens to be the week, our production week for our fall play at my school, for which I'm the technical director. So they kind of line up with each other well. So the materials will be posted, everything will be there, but we won't have an online meeting in week 12. And I'll post that to the Moodle as well as a reminder. But that's sort of the scope of the next 3 weeks. And what I might even do is try to roll out the materials in the Moodle maybe even a little ahead of time, because they are going to largely be kind of copies of each other with just different specifics, is to try to roll them out a little ahead of time so that if you happen to wrap up, this week's, the next week's may already be available, even if it's not quite next Tuesday. So just kind of keep your eye on that over the next few weeks. So these next 3 weeks kind of operate as a little unit within the rest of the course. So that's just kind of the broad overview schedule wise of the next few weeks, just to have that out there. So in terms of the idea of production, these tasks or these activities are really kind of a moment of synthesis for this course. We've actually covered a lot of ground so far in this course. We've talked about a lot of concepts related to instructional design, to how to create high quality goals, how to determine what kinds of learning is going on, how to break down goals into smaller steps for processing, how even to sort of at a basic level to do some materials planning to line up with all of that. So these production projects are about kind of bringing a number of those different pieces all together and specifically trying to locate materials that will support a particular instructional goal or instructional scenario. So a lot of it is just going to be pulling things that we've already covered and then adding in the additional pieces of kind of looking at some specifics about particular kinds of media or particular kinds of materials. So that's going to be the new piece, but the rest of it is going to be a lot of just pulling information that we've already gone over and already discussed, and then using that information to actually analyze materials and so on. So let me do this. I'm going to go over here in the Moodle. Let me get over to the main thing here. And I will then also share that screen. Doot. So we go to this. And that window always gets way tiny. So I know this shows up small for a lot of people. I'll try to zoom in as much as I can. It is going to cut some things off of the side. But again, this is all on the Moodle too. So if you even want to call up your own copy of it, but I'll just kind of go down through this. So the overview of this, as I said, is what we're going to be doing is pulling together what we talked about with materials, what we've talked about with learning types, what we've talked about with instructional goals, and this new piece of what are some things to look out for in terms of finding high quality materials of a particular type. So basically each media type or each material type kind of has its own particular things that are important for it to be, in order for it to be effective and useful as a learning tool. So we're going to be using all of that information to locate materials that match up with a scenario. So there will be, in this week, in the first 2 weeks, 3 scenarios presented. So you'll be looking for 3 pieces of instructional material, 1 for each scenario. In some cases, the specific type of material will be specified. In others, you may have a choice, a selection between one or the other. But that'll all be laid out at the end of this page. And again, and this is right here, this is not a production class. So the expectation is not for these that you are creating the materials, but rather that you are at this point looking to locate existing materials that match the needs of what you're looking for. So that's going to be the focus, is kind of going out into the world, seeing what's already out there, looking for something that you think fits all of the criteria that we're going to look at, and then doing a little analysis of whatever that piece of material is. In terms of the scenarios, there will be scenarios given for each combination. However, at any point, if a particular scenario lines up with your instructional design project. So, for example, the first one from tonight is a text-based type of material being used to teach facts. So if in your own instructional design, having gone through and done your materials lists, you know that somewhere you are teaching facts and you had said that there was going to be a text-based type of thing, a handout, I don't know, a web page, or something like that, then feel free to replace the given scenario with your own from your ID plan. And part of that is because in the final submission of your ID plans, you will need to include a couple of examples of materials. Not every material that you have listed. We're not going to do that. But I am going to be looking for a couple of examples. So if through these mini projects, you can locate some of those materials, then you've got them all set. Then you can just incorporate those into your instructional design plans. And that's laid out here, and it's also said several other places as we go. So just keep that in mind when you get to the specifics of the scenario, that if the scenario types match something in your instructional design, you can replace that scenario with your instructional design, and that way you can be locating materials that relate to your project. All right, so I've already gone over that. So here are the recaps. So these are the things that we've already gone over, but I'm just kind of putting them all here in one place. So when you're looking for the materials, there's sort of 3 or 4 different areas that you need to be keeping in mind and sort of analyzing your materials for. One of them goes back to the week where we talked about materials selection. And that was, I think, back in week 8. And that basically boiled down to, there were sort of these 3 things that we talked about. And there was a small group project you had done where you broke off and looked at some scenarios. But the summary, or just to recap, that the materials are appropriate, and that has a lot to do with alignment. So whatever your goal is, the materials need to align with that goal. And I know that's stating the obvious, but again, it's amazing how many times that gets overlooked. Oh, look at this flashy, handout. I better use that in my class. Who cares if it has nothing to do with the goals I'm trying to teach? Look how nice it looks. So make sure that the materials that you're selecting actually relate back to the instructional goals. They should be engaging, meaning that for whatever the type of material is, it needs to in some way connect with your student audience in a way that's going to make them want to engage with it. So, a good way to do that is to make sure that the materials somehow go beyond just passive interaction. Yes, it can be a text handout, but maybe there's something that they have to fill in on the text handout that they have to engage with the handout. Maybe it's just a video that they watch, but maybe there are questions that they have to answer about the video that are going to make sure that they engage with it. Or maybe it's just making sure that the video, whatever, the language, the examples, the whatever, are ones that are going to connect with your students. Right. So you're not showing old film strips from the 50s and 60s, because that's probably not going to do a whole lot to engage the student of today. So that's another piece of it that you're looking for. And then, as always, the accessibility issue. And this is really where these design concepts that are going to be introduced as we go through, that falls under here too, because a poorly designed graphic is kind of not accessible to anyone if they can't get the meaning out of it that they're supposed to. So some of the accessibility issue is just understanding how to design these various types of materials well. But then this is also gets into all of the issues of just general accessibility. Can all of your students interact and use this material in a way that's going to give them all equal opportunity to learn the material from it? So that could be language issues, it could be cultural issues, it could be whatever, cognitive issues. So as you're looking for your materials, keep in mind your target audience, and make sure that whatever you're selecting is going to be accessible to everybody in that target audience. Doesn't have to be accessible to everybody everywhere, because you're not designing this instruction for everybody everywhere, but it needs to be accessible to the people that are there. So in sort of one part of your brain or of your analysis, you're going to be keeping those three things in mind as you sort of audition your various materials and look for an example that you think is high quality. Then the second piece to keep in mind is the learning types. And this goes back to week 7. And this also kind of ties into the appropriateness from the previous one, is that you want to make sure that you're lining up the material with the type of learning that's happening. Now, there's going to be a little bit of artificialness to this, because I am going to be sort of pre-combining a type of material with a type of learning, just for the sake of this, because otherwise the number of possible combinations gets a little out of hand. But even within that, if you're looking at just simple text-based tools, those text-based tools can vary widely depending on whether you're trying to teach facts or principles or a procedure. So even within a single type of material category, there's still going to be things to keep in mind to make sure that it's aligning well with the type of learning that's happening. So for this first week, we're going to focus on 3 of the 8 learning types. We'll do another 3 next week, and then the final week will be the final 2, is how I'm sort of dividing this up. So for this week, facts, concepts, and principles. So there will be, you will do one material for a fact scenario, one material for a concept scenario, and one material for a principle scenario. So that's kind of the big picture. And I just here again, all this information is in more detail back in week 7, but this is just a quick overview of those 3 types of learning types, just to have all the information here in one place. So that's the second thing to keep in mind. So you want to keep in mind the material selection kind of guidelines, and you want to keep in mind what type of learning you're trying to address. And then the third thing is the actual type of material that you're going to be looking for. And we went over this, the types of materials again a few weeks ago. I think that was also in week 8, where I kind of laid out some broad categories of types of instructional materials. And we're just going to take a look at a couple of those each week. So for this first week, we're going to be working with visual media, but we're working with static visual media. So these are the most basic things: text and graphics. Not animations, not movies, but just basic text sort of handout types of things or web page kinds of things, and graphics. So charts, pictures, graphs, any of those types of materials. So those are going to be the 2 types of materials that you're looking for in support of our 3 learning types. So this is really the new piece, and this will be the one new area each week. And again, here's where I'm trying to tread this line of, I want to give you enough information where you can at least analyze materials based on what kind of material they are. For some, a lot of these tend to get into artistic kinds of concepts because a lot of it has to do with the visual production of it or the audio production of it or things like that. But also, again, each one of those things, a lot of these things are going to have their own dedicated course over the course of this program. So I don't want to get too much bogged down in the weeds of the details of these. So what I'll try to present each week is some kind of a reading or a handout or a presentation or an article that just kind of gives some of the basic concepts to think about. So things to be looking for. So you've got this graphic and you've got this graphic, and they both look like they're supporting your goals, and they both look like they're going to engage, and they kind of both meet the criteria. Then kind of, can you analyze them just as graphics and kind of say which one is sort of the better designed graphic, which means it will likely be a little bit more effective instructionally. So that's what these pieces are about. So before you get into selecting your media, or your examples, you're gonna want to take a look at both of these readings. So there's one for text or print based. It's a little long page wise, but like the last 4 or 5 pages are all references. And there's a couple of sections in it, and you'll be able to see which ones where it's not sort of specifically about text, strictly text-based things. So initially it may look like kind of a long read, but once you kind of get into it, it's really not that bad. But it just goes through a bunch of things, like what kind of voice should be used in order to engage students if you're doing instruction. So things like that about the kind of language used, and then even things about the layout of like, what are some things that you should be aware of when you're laying text out for people to read in order to make that text more effective or easier to understand. So that article will give you some of the highlights, and that's what it's meant to do. Again, we're not getting into every single detail about design at this point, but I wanted to give you enough of a framework so that you can then use that to help evaluate materials as you find them. And the other type is graphics. And with graphics, I'm kind of latching on to a theory in graphic design called the Gestalt principles. I can't remember if we have any art. I know we have at least one art teacher here. I don't know if the Gestalt principles are anything you've come across, but they basically have to do with like uh, the ways that people, when they look at a graphic, that we tend to process the graphic as a whole as opposed to individual elements. So it has to do with like completion, where you can have an incomplete figure and the human brain will complete the figure for you, kind of a thing. If you think of the World Wildlife Federation's logo of the panda, if you actually look at that panda logo, it's just some black splotches. There's no outline, but you always see it as a panda because your brain automatically fills in the outline. So there's some sort of rules within the idea of Gestalt, and they all apply to instruction, because if these rules are ignored, then it can make graphics confusing. It can make them harder to process. It can make it more difficult for somebody looking at them to get the information out of them that's needed. So that one is, the first page kind of presents a few different overviews of Gestalt, and then goes through some of the more common rules of Gestalt in design. So those are the two new pieces, and that's where I would suggest starting the week, is by going through those two reads and maybe coming up with your own little shorthand quick checklist of some of the major ideas. So that will then give you, those are the three directions from which you're going to be analyzing materials. And the idea is, if you can put big check marks in all three of those areas, then whatever the material is, most likely is going to be pretty effective as an instructional tool. And that's what we're looking for. But if you are holding this piece of material up and it's kind of so-so here and doesn't really fit over here, and oh yeah, they broke a bunch of the rules here, then that's probably going to take it off the table as being something you would actually want to use for instructional purposes. So that's the approach we're taking, is we're synthesizing these various pieces of knowledge that we have about instruction, design, and materials, and trying to use them in order to find materials. So that brings us to the actual assignment. And again, this is what is going to, basically all that's going to change over the next few weeks is, what are the learning types and what are the types of materials we're looking for. So that's what we're going to rotate through in different combinations over the next 2 weeks. But other than that, everything that I just went over is going to basically be a copy for the next couple of weeks. So again, some of this stuff has already been touched on. These are going to be Word documents or PDFs or whatever you want to use to create. And within that document, for this week, you'll have 3 subsections, one for each of the scenarios. And probably each subsection is going to be 2, maybe 3 paragraphs. It's not page after page after page. So it's, hopefully all put together, it's not going to be that big of a deal. So as I said, I'm giving you scenarios, but feel free to replace them with your own if you wish. To say it again, this is not designed to be a production course, so you're not expected to create these materials. Although if you're somebody who already has a fair amount of experience in something, or you've created materials for a class already that you think are really going to work well, then don't set them aside. Feel free to use them, but that's just not that's not required for this. So it's mostly about analyzing existing materials. You want to find high quality materials that are going to align well with your goals. Now, I'm taking into account that you may go out there and look for stuff, and even after searching and searching and searching, really feel like you haven't found anything that really is high quality. If that is the case, if you really haven't found something that you really think will work well, you do also have the option of picking a flawed example, maybe find the best that you could find, but then in your write-up, just address what you would improve about it, so that is okay too. So you may not find the perfect example, um, and that's okay. Find the best one that you think you can find, and then if you've identified issues with it, just address that within your write-up. Maybe at the end of the write-up say, this example, while good, had some issues in the following areas. If I was to redesign it, or if I was to use this, I would do the following to improve the quality of the material, or something along those lines. So that is also an option too. So the actual section, for each section, you're going to give just a brief summary of what the scenario was, what the learning type was, and then the main part of it is your analysis. Here's this material that I found, this graphic, this website, this handout, and here, and then analyze it from the three perspectives we talked about. Does it look like it's going to match the goals and be accessible and be engaging? Does it match the learning type of the skill that's being taught? And with your knowledge of the type of the design aspects of that type of material, does it do those things well? So that'll be your couple of paragraphs of your write-up. Again, if there's anything that you would like to strengthen in the material, add that into the write-up as well. And then that's basically it. You will need to include copies of the materials so that I can take a look at them as well. Obviously, these things are going to have a wide range in terms of where they're coming from and what they are. So, whatever you need to do, you could embed, if it's a web resource, you could embed a hyperlink to that web page in the Word document. You could, if it's something that you can copy and paste directly into your Word document, you can do that. Especially maybe for the graphics. If it's just a separate graphics file, you can upload those separately to the assignment. So you could upload your Word document and then just attach additional files as well. I just ask, if you're doing that, just make sure that you've named them all pretty clearly so that I know which example goes with which scenarios, so on. So you might just have to get a little creative in terms of how to get it so that I can see them. You could even use, I know a lot of people use Google Drive or Dropbox. You could share a link with me for the materials in one of those. Just make sure, if you're using any of those, that the correct permissions are given so that I can actually access it. A lot of school-based Google Drive environments are pretty locked down, so people from the outside can't just come in and grab your materials. So just make sure, if you're going to do something like that, that it's something where you can make the links public. So that's basically what you submit. Will be a document that will have, for this week, 3 scenario write-ups, which are mostly going to be analysis. You're making the case for why this particular material you've selected is going to be a really good fit for this scenario. Or it's kind of a good material, but it could be better in these ways. And includes the examples of the materials as you find them. The only remaining thing then are just the scenarios themselves. And I'm trying to make these relatively general. So if you want to add any specificity to it, if you want to have a particular group of students in mind as you're selecting a particular material, feel free to kind of embellish. But I wanted to keep these pretty basic and general so that the focus is more on analyzing the materials. So for this week, for facts, the goal for facts has to do with, this comes out of language arts, the 5 common types of poetic feat. And I don't expect everybody to know this stuff too, so you're probably going to educate yourself as well. But these are some of my favorite words in the English language: iambic, trochaic, dactylic, anapestic, and spondaic. They just have to do with stress patterns in poetry. Does it go da 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 or da 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 da? So you don't need to be an expert on them. You're going to be looking for the instructional materials that support them. So, I just tried to spread out where the various scenarios come from in terms of their content areas. So this is, in terms of a setting, this is a 10th grade English class. So it's high school level students. Um, if you want to, you can assume with any of these populations that there's going to be a spread in terms of ability, a spread in terms of background, a spread probably in terms of language and other types of things. So just kind of keep that in mind, but just to kind of at least tag it to an age of student, sort of a level of student. And for that one, you're looking for text-based materials. So a handout, text-based web pages can be text-based too, or other types of things. It could be from a textbook. Not that many people use actual textbooks anymore, I guess, but anything that's basically text-based. I know one question I'll get is, well, I found this thing, but there's like 2 images on the page. Is that okay to use? Yeah, as long as the majority of the instructional thing is text, then it's okay to use. If there's a couple of images, it's probably going to be hard to find these days anything that is only text and has absolutely no imagery included whatsoever. But just make sure that whatever you're locating is majority text based. All right, so that's scenario number 1, is a little bit of poetry. Number 2 is a concept. And in this case, the concept is work. And that's not as in what job do you have, but this is the physics concept of work. So it's when force is used to displace something. That is the definition of work. This is a 7th grade science class, so a middle school age group. So that might affect some of the decisions about what the materials should look like in order to engage them. And this is going to be your graphics based one. So here we're looking for some kind of a graphic image, a chart, a photo, a whatever that helps support the concept of force in physics. So that's that material. And then the final one for this week is principles. And for here, I went to PE. And the principle is the principle of progression in physical training or in activity. If anybody has ever been involved in any sport or any kind of training or anything like that, my understanding is that progression basically just means that you sort of increase the level or the intensity of the workout in order to improve performance over time. So, but that's a basic principle within physical training. And I don't know. I tried to see if this is the kind of thing that might be taught in elementary school. It seems like, at least at some level, they would probably address this kind of an issue of you can't just do the same thing every day. You've got to see, a progression. It's got to get harder. So, but I wanted to do something that was at the elementary level, again, just for the sort of getting a range of student populations. And for this one, it's your choice. You can look for a graphic based thing, or you can look for a text based thing. The age of student you're dealing with might affect that choice, but that one is up to you. Since we have 3 learning types and we've only got 2 material types this week, that's how I decided to line them up. So that is a lot of information, I know, and I'm hoping that it doesn't feel too overwhelming right now. Again, it's 2, maybe 3 paragraphs, 3 scenarios. So if that works out to, I mean, it really shouldn't be much more than like 3 pages long total. And it's really more about the analysis. It's showing me what I'm looking for is that here's an instructional material. You know the goals you're trying to reach. You know what kind of learning is happening. You know what a good example of this type of material looks like. Can you look at this and show me that you can reflect on whether this material is going to be effective or not? So that's kind of what I'm looking for. Again, they don't have to be perfect examples. In fact, showing me that you can identify where things could improve, that's not a bad thing to show. Um, but basically, we're at the point here of kind of doing synthesis, of drawing a lot of different concepts that we've covered so far in this course together I mean, this is sort of where the rubber would hit the road. This is where we're actually getting the materials that we're going to put in front of our students so that hopefully they can reach those goals that we set back in the first couple weeks of the course. So that's what we're trying to work on over the next few weeks, is just get comfortable with that process. Because this then is also, again, for those of you going on in the master's program, you get to the Photoshop class. All of this information, as you're creating things within Photoshop or within whatever platform they're using, you know, these are the kinds of thoughts you want to be having. Is what I'm creating aligning to the goals? What are the goals? Who is this for? Who's my audience? Is this going to engage them? Is it going to be interesting? Is this a good example of a graphic design that's going to be not confusing and be clear and effective and all of that? So we're trying to use this to set up a lot of things that are going to be coming down the road. All right. So questions. The actual assignment, everything I just went through is all on one page. The actual assignment where you will upload things is a separate thing. And I just kind of give a basic overview of the structure, which I just went through. It's going to be 3 sections. Each section you summarize and then do your couple of paragraphs analyzing and supporting your choice. If you have any suggestions for improvement, and then attaching the example of the material that you found, either directly in the Word document or separately or as a link or something like that. Oh, and again, those 3 scenarios I just went through, that's what I was saying. If in your own instructional design, you're teaching a concept in this step, and you had identified that you needed some kind of a graphic to support that concept, then feel free to use that as your scenario as opposed to the one that I've given. All right. And then that way you'll have found that piece, which you can then later include into your final instructional design projects. So that's, again, I've said that before, but just to say that one more time now that we've been through the scenarios. So I did not make very good use of wait time there. So questions? All right. So yeah, it's everything I just went through is there. The readings are in the Moodle, and they're also linked from within the instructional page. The mini project actual assignment is down in the homework section. There's really, I mean, aside from getting caught up on anything from previous weeks, this is really the only assignment for this week, is just to get through this first one. I am going to add in phase 3 next week. I didn't want to add it this week because that was going to be one thing too many. But get through the first week of this, get comfortable with it. But the third phase of the instructional design project is going to be about your assessment piece. So if you haven't contributed to the forum from last week about assessment, that would be good to do, because that'll get your thoughts going in terms of that. And I may also, I'm still deciding on this, I may actually roll the materials piece of the instructional design project into phase 3 as well, rather than making it a separate phase. I'm just kind of looking at our sequencing going forward, and it might make sense just to kind of squish those 2 phases together, because the assessment phase is not going to be nearly as long as the previous 2 phases. So I may decide to combine those two, but all that information will come out next week. Don't worry about it this week, other than just making sure you're caught up with previous stuff. Just focus on this for the week, get a handle on it. If you can get through this week's and things seem pretty good, then the next 2 weeks are gonna, I think, roll pretty easily, because it'll, again, just be changing the details, but it'll be a similar process for the next couple of weeks. All right, anything else for the good of the order?
Will phase 3 be due at the same time as these mini projects?
No, no. If I'm going to combine the two together, I'd push that date out past the mini projects. I'll make the assignment available next week, but you'll have 2 or 3 weeks to work on it. So yeah, I'm trying to be as careful as I can be about overloading on work on a given week. So I'm trying to spread things out as much as possible. So, all right, anything else? All right. Well, I was hoping to wrap up by 8. I almost hit that tonight. So all of this is there. I've recorded all of this too, so that video will be up by tomorrow morning. So if you need to review anything that I went over, it'll be there also in video form. And just let me know if you have questions or concerns as the week goes on. All right. Thank you all for being here. We'll
Thank you.
see you next week for just a brief check-in.
Awesome.
All right. Good night.